I knew I was vanishing the day Ethan Ward stood up in the Monday briefing and presented my supply chain integration model like he'd just invented Excel. He even used my exact phrase, bottleneck neutralization, the one I scribbled on a napkin during a caffeine and migraine brainstorming session 2 years ago. The entire conference room nodded like dashboard bobbleheads, hanging on his every word. Not a single mention of me, no acknowledgement, no quick credit to the ops team, just Ethan in his designer blazer and startup founder confidence, soaking up the oxygen like it was his personal spotlight. When I raised my hand to clarify a technical point, the CEO waved me off with that corporate calm smile. "Let's not derail the vision, Caroline. Derail the vision." I wish I could tell you I snapped right there. That I flipped a chair, delivered a fiery monologue, maybe rage posted my resignation letter on LinkedIn. But no. I nodded. I smiled. And then I made a mental note to update a spreadsheet on my desktop labeled Caroline's Quiet Fury. For the record, I wasn't new to being invisible. After 5 years as senior operations architect at Martech Dynamics, I'd perfected the art of making disasters disappear before leadership even smelled smoke. I was the glue, the fixer, the one who stayed late to rewrite contracts or clean up data after some executive visionary broke production again. I believed, naively, that integrity whispered while noise faded. I thought if I just kept my head down and delivered immaculate work, truth would rise. But the noise grew teeth. Ethan had been my project partner once, junior, eager, always fishing for templates. Then, somewhere between quarterly reports and management reshuffles, he learned that confidence dressed in designer suits traveled faster than competence in cardigans. He began quoting my insights during meetings, paraphrasing my frameworks in his updates, until his version of my voice replaced me entirely. It began small. He'd say, "We've been exploring a cross-functional pivot," and I'd flinch, recognizing my slide deck verbatim behind his words. Then my meeting invites began vanishing. Strategy syncs I used to run now appeared on my calendar under Ethan, lead presenter. My title still read Senior Architect, but in practice, I'd become the note-taker in rooms I once controlled. I still told myself leadership would notice, that somewhere, in some C-suite, someone cared who actually built the damn framework keeping the company alive. So I kept showing up early, with printouts nobody requested, but everyone used. I sent emails with full context and perfect grammar. I smiled when Ethan said, "Appreciate your support in there," like I was his assistant. Then came the day I overheard HR refer to him as the architect of the expansion blueprint. Architect, my blueprint. My hands shook so hard I almost spilled my coffee. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in my cubicle until midnight, staring at the blinking cursor in an empty email draft. But instead of typing a resignation, I opened the internal archive drive, a digital graveyard of old contracts and compliance PDFs. Out of habit more than hope, I started reading. Hours blurred. My desk plant wilted. My energy drained. But somewhere between the merger agreements and asset transfer memos from years ago, I found it. A relic I'd signed back when no one else wanted to bother. Clause 12.7.4 of a dormant acquisition file from Loginet Systems. At the time, it meant nothing. Just boilerplate legalese attached to an IP transfer packet. But that night, the words glowed. In absence of a successor designation, product IP originating under assigned lead defaults to originating lead's authority for external application. My title had been assigned lead. No successor had ever been named. Ethan thought he was building his empire on my silence. He didn't realize the foundation still had my name engraved in the concrete. From that moment, everything shifted. I stopped reacting. I started documenting. Every time Ethan spoke my words, I noted the date and context. Every slide he repurposed, I exported metadata. I created a folder labeled Insurance. By Friday, it held 56 PDFs and a growing sense of clarity. The following week, He strutted into my workspace, sipping his caramel latte like an award speech was imminent. "Big meeting tomorrow, Caroline," he said. "You mind prepping the pre-read?" I smiled. "Sure. Want me to include the original timeline of contributions too?" He blinked. "No, just high level. Keep it shallow." I nodded. "Oh, Ethan, we're already way past shallow." That night, I printed Clause 12.7.4, highlighted it in gold, and slid it into a manila folder labeled simply Lunch Notes. Tomorrow, I'd bring it to the meeting. Quietly. The next morning arrived in that peculiar corporate quiet, the kind that hums beneath fluorescent lights before a storm hits. Everyone was busy prepping for Ethan's Vision 2030 presentation. The office buzzed with small talk and fake excitement, the kind of collective delusion people cling to when they sense power shifting and want to stay on the winning side. Ethan strutted in like a tech messiah, flashing smiles, tossing high fives, his confidence radiating off him like cheap cologne. The marketing team was stringing up banners for the launch event. I watched from my desk, stirring cold coffee, folder labeled Lunch Notes tucked neatly inside my bag. It's funny. When people decide to erase you, they assume you'll go quietly. They mistake stillness for surrender. But silence, in the right hands, is a scalpel. I'd been sharpening mine for months. By 9 a.m., the first email hit. Reminder, expansion strategy review. Directors only. I wasn't on the list. I smiled. Perfect. I'd been the one to draft the framework, map dependencies, calculate vendor redundancy, and yet somehow I was excluded from the meeting where my own work would be showcased. Ethan wanted the spotlight. I wanted the evidence. And soon, we'd both have exactly what we deserved. I waited until 15 minutes before the meeting started, then printed a clean copy of the clause, 12.7.4, along with the IP ownership metadata showing my name as originating lead. I sealed them in an envelope, folded once, and slipped it into my tote. The hallway smelled of burnt coffee and ambition. Inside the glass-walled conference room, the leadership team was already gathering. The CEO, a man named Richard Lang, was leaning back, checking his smartwatch between sips of green juice. HR was there, legal too. Liam Porter, junior counsel with more degrees than real experience. Ethan stood at the front, sleeves rolled, tie loose, performing confidence like an Olympic sport. "Morning, team," he began, grinning wide. "Today, we're looking at how the Ethan Ward expansion model redefines scalability." I nearly laughed. The Ethan Ward model. From the back of the room, I slid quietly into an empty seat near legal, setting my folder on the table without a word. Ethan caught my eye briefly. That same smirk he always wore when he thought he'd won. "Glad you could make it, Caroline," he said, voice dripping with performative warmth. "We might need your help with some technical clarifications later." "Of course," I replied, tone even, pulse steady. He launched into his deck. Slide after slide. My diagrams, my models, my frameworks, even the typos were mine. The room murmured approval. "Brilliant," someone whispered. "Elegant structure," said another. I just watched the performance unfold. Every applause another nail in his coffin. When he reached the final section, Ethan leaned casually against the table. "This plan," he said, "represents a clean break from outdated processes. It's a foundation for long-term scalability and competitive edge." He paused, scanning the room. "We've left behind the old systems, the legacy baggage." Legacy baggage. My jaw tightened. He was quoting himself, quoting me. My own phrase, twisted into an insult. That was my cue. I leaned slightly forward and spoke for the first time. "Actually," I said softly, before we move on, You might want to take a look at something. Ethan blinked. Now's not the time, Caroline. But I was already sliding the envelope across the polished table toward legal. Just a quick note, I said, calm as marble. Something about IP continuity. The CEO frowned. IP continuity? Liam, the lawyer, opened the envelope, brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the highlighted text. His posture changed. A subtle stiffening, the kind only lawyers have when they realize a grenade just rolled across the table. Ethan kept talking, oblivious. And with these projections, we're confident in Q3 rollout. Liam cleared his throat. I'm sorry, could we pause for a moment? The room fell silent. He turned to the CEO, voice low but firm. This clause, clause 12.7.4, indicates that the originating lead of the integrated IP remains the sole signatory for external application unless formally succeeded. According to this document, that signatory is... He looked at me. Caroline Holt. The air shifted. The hum of the projector filled the silence. Richard Lang's smile faltered. Ethan stopped mid-sentence, confusion cracking across his face like lightning. Wait, what? Liam continued. Without her signature, none of this, the entire expansion plan, is legally executable. Not the rollout, not the investor pitch, not even the internal documentation. Richard turned slowly to me. Is that accurate? I met his gaze. Yes, and I have all the supporting materials. Timestamps, authorship logs, original merger files, everything. Ethan's lips parted, then closed. His voice broke when he finally spoke. That can't be. It is, I said, standing, calm and deliberate. You've been building your future on my foundation. The problem is, I still own the land. The silence that followed was the most exquisite sound I'd ever heard inside that building. You could hear the air conditioner hum, the faint clink of someone's pen against a mug, and then nothing. Just the static quiet of collective realization. The CEO leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes darting between me, Ethan, and Liam from legal, like he was triangulating the source of an explosion. Ethan, still standing at the head of the table, looked like he'd been unplugged from reality. His voice wavered when he finally found it. Carolyn, what are you even talking about? That clause is ancient history. It's irrelevant now. Liam cleared his throat. Actually, no, it's not. The clause was never rescinded, never superseded, and the successor designation field was left blank. It's still enforceable. The CEO's expression darkened. You're telling me this entire expansion, this multi-million-dollar plan we're pitching next week, rests on a document we never updated? Liam nodded slowly, avoiding eye contact. I'm afraid so, sir. Ethan's laugh came out sharp, brittle. That's absurd. We've been operating under my version of the framework for months. Your version? I echoed quietly. You mean the one copied line for line from my integration models, including the misspelled field names you didn't bother to fix? His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked toward the CEO for backup, but Richard Lang's patience was unraveling. Ethan, is that true? Ethan stammered. She's twisting this. She's bitter, trying to hold the company hostage because I read the fine print? I interrupted. Because while you were busy rebranding my work, I was making sure our legal foundations didn't collapse under your vanity project? I tilted my head. You're welcome. A soft murmur rippled through the room. HR pretended to study their notes. Legal kept flipping through the pages I'd printed. Liam's finger landed on the gold highlight, eyes widening. Clause 12.7.4. Yes, it's all here. Without her signature, none of the IP transfers are valid. We could be liable for breach if we move forward. The CEO rubbed his temples. This can't be real. There has to be a workaround. I folded my hands neatly. There isn't. The projector flickered, Ethan's bright blue Vision 2030 slide casting ghostly light across his face. His confidence was melting by the second. "You're not actually doing this," he said, voice trembling. "You'd sink the whole launch just to prove a point?" I met his gaze evenly. "No, Ethan. I'm saving the company from launching a plan built on unauthorized intellectual property. The fact that it happens to dismantle your career is just collateral compliance." Richard Lang exhaled hard through his nose, the kind of sound executives make when they realize the hero of the story isn't who they thought. "Caroline, can we step into my office?" "Of course," I said, gathering my things. "But before we do," I turned to Liam. "You'll want to document this meeting for the record. Clause 12.74. Active. Binding. Signatory. Caroline Holt." The lawyer nodded, already typing. Ethan's face drained of color. "You're bluffing," he muttered. "If I were bluffing," I said, opening my bag and setting a white folder on the table, "this wouldn't exist." The label read, "Continuity Evidence, June 2018. Inside were copies of every file, timestamp, and email linking me to the original project. I slid it forward. "Metadata doesn't bluff." Liam reached for it like it was radioactive. The CEO's eyes flicked to the folder, then to me. "Caroline, we'll need to discuss next steps privately." I nodded once. "I'll be in the conference room across the hall." As I turned to leave, Ethan called out, "You're ruining everything we built!" I paused by the door, looked back, and said evenly, "We didn't build it, Ethan." "I did. You just changed the font." Then I walked out. The heavy glass door closed behind me with a satisfying hush. Through the frosted pane, I could see them huddled, voices low, eyes wide, realizing what the legal implications meant. By the time I reached my desk, my inbox was already pinging. HR wanted a quick alignment chat, legal wanted clarification, and the CEO wanted a private meeting at 3 p.m. I smiled, sipping the cold remains of my coffee. The trap had finally sprung. For 5 years, they'd built their empire on my silence. Now, that silence was evidence, and it spoke louder than any meeting ever had. By 3 p.m., the sky outside was the color of old paper, dull, gray, and perfect for dismantling illusions. The executive floor was eerily quiet when I stepped off the elevator. You could sense it, that brittle, electric stillness that always follows a corporate explosion. The receptionist didn't meet my eyes. HR was pretending to look busy, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. Everyone knew something had detonated in that meeting room, and my name was written on the smoke. Richard Lang's office door was half open. I knocked once. He looked up, motioned me in, and gestured toward the seat across from his massive walnut desk. Beside him sat Liam Porter from Legal, his tie slightly crooked, a laptop open and recording. No Ethan, no HR mediator, just the two of them, and me. "Caroline," Richard began, rubbing his temple. "We're in a bit of a mess here. Then it's a good thing I like cleaning up other people's messes," I said calmly, setting my folder on the table. He exhaled through his nose. "I'll get straight to it. Legal confirmed the clause is valid. We overlooked the continuity paperwork after the Loginet acquisition. That's on us. But we can fix this." I raised an eyebrow. "Fix this how?" He leaned forward. "We'll file a successor update retroactively. There's precedent. We'll acknowledge your contribution in internal documentation and move forward with the launch. I can even authorize a discretionary bonus as a goodwill gesture." The way he said bonus, like tossing breadcrumbs to a bird he hoped would fly away, made my stomach turn. "Mr. Lang," I said evenly, "that clause isn't a courtesy, it's ownership. You can't retroactively override it without my signature." And considering your legal counsel just confirmed that, I'd advise we skip the empty offers. Liam shifted in his chair, trying to maintain composure. Ms. Holt, we're all on the same side here. No one wants this to escalate. Escalate? I repeated softly. I've done nothing but watch my work get repackaged under another name. You call that escalation? I call it documentation. Richard sighed, his corporate diplomacy beginning to crack. Look, we understand you feel wronged, and I sympathize. But going to investors or regulators would only damage your own reputation. You're part of this company. I smiled. I was. Until you let someone else take credit for my department's backbone. Liam cleared his throat. What exactly is it that you want, Caroline? There it was. The question I'd been waiting months to hear. I reached into my bag and placed a single white page on the desk. 3 short lines. Clear, unemotional. 1. Back pay and credit for all strategic development work tied to Loginet IP frameworks dating to 2018. 2. Formal recognition of authorship and originating leadership in all internal and external strategy communications. 3. Official reassignment of plan leadership in board minutes and public filings. I slid the page toward them, my pen resting neatly on top. I'll consider signing the continuity release once these conditions are met in writing. You have until Friday at 5. Richard blinked. You're giving us a deadline? Deadlines are how we keep projects from collapsing, I said, tone calm, deliberate. I assumed you appreciated structure. Liam looked like he wanted to argue, but instead typed something into his laptop, jaw tight. Richard stared at me, really stared, like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Not as a cog or a fixer, but as a liability he couldn't control. You realize, he said finally, this could destroy Ethan's career. I tilted my head slightly. Ethan destroyed his own career the moment he printed my diagrams with his name on them. He didn't reply. The room sat in heavy silence for a long time, the kind that tastes like defeat on one side and liberation on the other. I could see the thought forming in Richard's mind. She's not bluffing. He'd seen women in boardrooms go quiet before, but never like this. Not with evidence, not with leverage, not with an expiration date attached to her calm. Finally, he said, you'll have your answer by Friday. I stood, collected my folder, and buttoned my blazer. Good. Then we'll either settle this quietly, or we'll let the investors read Clause 12.7.4 themselves. As I walked out, I passed Ethan in the hallway. His face was pale, jaw tense, fake smile trembling. You went to legal? He hissed. No, I said, brushing past him. Legal came to me. By the time I reached my floor, the rumor mill was already spinning. I could feel eyes tracking me as I walked through the bullpen. The woman they'd ignored suddenly visible, outlined in quiet fire. It wasn't anger that kept me standing tall. It was relief, the kind that comes when you stop hoping for fairness and start calculating consequences. By Friday morning, the tension in the building was thick enough to cut with a letter opener. You could smell panic in the recycled office air. Coffee stronger than usual. The silence before meetings sharper than the hum of the fluorescent lights. HR avoided eye contact. Legal was in back-to-back calls. And Ethan? He was a ghost. The kind of ghost that still left coffee cups on your desk, but couldn't meet your gaze. I arrived early, wearing the same gray blazer they'd once told me was too muted for leadership presence. I liked that. Muted was invisible, and invisible was power when no one saw you coming. I set my laptop down, opened my email, and there it was. An invite from the CEO. 3:00 p.m. Boardroom. Continuity agreement discussion. No subject line, no pleasantries, just that. The morning crawled by in corporate half-speed. Slack messages trickled in, all polite and nervous. Hey, just checking. Are you attending the launch rehearsal? Need your notes on the vendor deck? Everyone pretending it was business as usual, like the company's entire IP framework wasn't hanging on a single signature. Mine. At 2:45, I walked into the boardroom. The air conditioning was set too low, the kind of cold that made anxiety feel colder. Around the table sat the cast of this slow-motion opera: Richard Lang, CEO, Liam Porter from Legal, holding a folder thick with printouts, HR Director Simone Beck, with a clipboard like a shield, and at the far end, Ethan Ward, trying to look composed, fingers drumming on a closed laptop. "Caroline," Richard said, standing briefly before motioning for me to sit. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have much of a choice," I replied, placing my bag on the chair beside me. He sighed, clasping his hands. "Let's get straight to it. Legal has reviewed your requests. We can confirm back pay for your development work, effective from 2018 to present. The amount will be determined by finance, but it will reflect your level of contribution." I nodded once, expression unreadable. "And the other terms?" Liam cleared his throat. "Formal recognition of authorship will be included in our internal documentation and all upcoming investor communications. The leadership reassignment. Well, that's where we hit complications." "Complications?" I repeated. "Yes," Richard said. The optics of removing Ethan as lead architect right before launch could destabilize investor confidence. "We're proposing a joint leadership designation instead. Co-leads, if you will." Across the table, Ethan gave a tiny, smug nod, like he'd just found a lifeline. "That seems fair," he said carefully. I smiled. Not wide, just enough to make him nervous. "Fair," I repeated. That's a lovely word for people who've never had to fight for credit. "Caroline," Richard said, lowering his voice. "We're all trying to protect the company here." "So am I," I replied, sliding a folder onto the table. This contains the metadata from the Loginet acquisition, original timestamps, signatory records, and the internal audit log showing I was never replaced. It also includes a notice of intent to file for IP ownership breach under Section 304 if this isn't resolved by 5 o'clock today. The room froze. Liam leaned forward, scanning the top page. His mouth moved silently as he read the heading. Ethan broke first. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't actually file that." I turned to him slowly. "Ethan, if you've learned anything this week, it should be this. I don't bluff. I build." The CEO interjected, voice firm but strained. "Let's stay civil. No threats." "No threats," I agreed softly. "Just outcomes." I folded my hands. "I'll accept co-lead credit if—" Ethan exhaled in relief. "Thank you. If," I continued, "the public filing lists my name first. The press release cites my original framework by title, and I personally sign off on every derivative document going forward. My signature, not his." Liam looked up. "That's unusual." "Unusual," I said, "is me building your expansion infrastructure from scratch while someone else gets applause for it." "I think we can afford a little unusual." The CEO's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to rewrite the launch narrative." I leaned back. "No, Mr. Lang, I'm asking you to correct it." The clock on the wall ticked, loud and unforgiving. 4:43 p.m. Liam looked between us, then whispered something to Richard. Paper shuffled. The CEO exhaled heavily. "Fine," he said at last. "Done. You'll have it in writing by end of day." I nodded. "Good, because at 5:01, my contingency folder goes to our external counsel." Ethan stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You're going to ruin me over this. I met his eyes. No, Ethan. I'm going to make sure history remembers who built the machine. At 4:58, I signed the continuity amendment. The CEO countersigned, legal stamped it. HR looked like she might faint. When I stood to leave, I reached for the folder labeled lunch notes. Ethan's hand twitched toward it, but I was faster. Don't worry, I said, slipping it into my bag. You'll see it again, on the wall of the investor lounge. Then I walked out, leaving behind the soft click of panic and the sweet sound of my name finally echoing through the building they'd tried to erase me from. By Monday morning, the building had changed temperature. Not literally. Still too cold, still the same flicker of dying fluorescent lights. But something in the air had shifted. The buzz was quieter, the greetings tighter, the laughter forced. I could feel the echo of Friday's meeting still vibrating through the cubicles like aftershock. Someone in marketing must have leaked the news because half the office already knew the co-lead announcement wasn't a partnership. It was a surrender. I arrived early, as usual. The elevator doors opened, and every conversation within earshot paused for a beat before resuming in fake, casual tones. I walked past the break room where Ethan once held court with his team huddles and found it empty. His signature cold brew cup sat abandoned on the counter, straw bent, label peeled halfway off. A symbol, really, half of what he used to be. My desk was the same, but the energy around it wasn't. People who once looked through me now stopped to nod or mumble awkward congratulations. The same ones who had CC'd Ethan instead of me on project threads now found reasons to loop Caroline in. Gratitude built on fear tastes different. It's metallic, hollow, but still strangely satisfying. At 9:10 a.m., a company-wide email landed in my inbox. Subject, Expansion Framework Announcement from CEO Richard Lang. Effective immediately, Caroline Holt and Ethan Ward will serve as co-leads of the National Expansion Initiative. Caroline's foundational contributions during the LogiNet integration remain vital to our future strategy. We appreciate her continued leadership and oversight. I reread the line 3 times, savoring every syllable. Foundational contributions. It wasn't poetry, but it was acknowledgement, corporate gospel carved into the company record. I forwarded the email to myself, archived it in the insurance folder, then stood and stretched. By noon, the damage control tour had begun. Richard walked the floor, shaking hands and pretending the power shift was part of our growth story. Ethan trailed 2 steps behind, his smile forced, the color gone from his face. When he reached my desk, he stopped like a man standing over his own gravestone. "Morning," he said, voice brittle. "Morning," I replied, not looking up from my screen. He waited a second, then blurted, "You didn't have to humiliate me." I looked at him, finally, calm and steady. "You humiliated yourself when you built a career on someone else's work. I just turned the lights on." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "You think this makes you the hero?" "No," I said. "Heroes ask for fairness. I asked for credit." He left without another word. Around 2, I got a ping from Liam in legal. Compliance wants confirmation that the clause documents have been archived. You're still primary signatory. I smiled. Still, the word had weight. I replied with a simple, confirmed, signed under retention clause 12.74. All rights reserved. Then I shut my laptop, grabbed my coffee, and took the elevator up to the top floor. The launch rehearsal was happening. Press materials, investor reps, camera crews, all staged to present unity. When I stepped into the glass conference hall, the room went still. Ethan stood at the podium rehearsing lines from the presentation script. My script. He froze when he saw me. Richard cleared his throat, trying to keep the show on track. "Caroline, glad you're here," he said smoothly. "We were just doing a run-through." I nodded. Then let's make sure the record reflects it properly. I walked to the front, adjusted the microphone, and took my place beside Ethan. Slide 3 is mislabeled, I said. That's my framework. Titled Continuity Integration Grid, not Ward Model. Fix it before this goes live. Richard blinked. Of course. Ethan said nothing. His jaw flexed, his fingers tightening on the podium edge. The team from PR watched, frozen between curiosity and fear. I turned to the audience. We're all aligned now, right? A few nervous nods. Cameras flashed. The final version of the deck updated that afternoon, with both our names on the title slide, mine listed first. By 5, the PR email hit every inbox in the building. Caroline Holt leads strategic expansion for Martech Dynamics. Ethan's name was buried 2 paragraphs down, under additional advisory support. That night, I stayed late. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the empty office after the storm. I sat at my desk, opened the lunch notes folder, and added one final document. Outcome Summary. Clause 12.7.4. The last line read, "Integrity doesn't whisper. It waits. Then it signs." I closed the folder, slipped it into my bag, and turned off the light. The office was dark, quiet, and, for the first time in years, mine. The investor call happened 3 days later. I wasn't supposed to be there, not according to the original schedule Ethan had drafted weeks ago. But the new agenda, my agenda, listed me as the primary presenter. The invitation hit my inbox at 6:47 a.m. with a short note from the CEO. Caroline, we'll need you to lead this one. No apology, no explanation. Just that quiet acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted for good. By 8 p.m, I was in the glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown. The early sunlight caught the steel edges of the buildings, scattering reflections across the table like fractured promises. The board dialed in. 5 investors, 1 federal grant liaison, 2 auditors. Ethan sat 2 chairs down, pale, trying not to fidget. Richard Lang hovered at the head of the table, the forced calm of a man rehearsing damage control. When the meeting began, I didn't perform. I didn't preen. I didn't fill the air with jargon the way Ethan always had. I simply opened the presentation, slide by slide, walking them through the real framework, the structure I'd designed years earlier, now restored under its rightful name. Every chart, every dependency, every projection was annotated and verifiable. It wasn't just solid, it was bulletproof. Halfway through, one of the investors interrupted. "This integration model," he said, tapping the screen with his pen. "The Holt continuity grid? Wasn't this what your last lead presented as the Ward plan?" Richard cleared his throat, words fumbling. There was some internal overlap in authorship. I stepped in smoothly. No overlap, just oversight. The framework originated under my leadership during the Loginet acquisition. Clause 12.7.4 confirms continuity authority remains under the originating signatory. Me. Legal has verified it. The investor blinked. "You're telling us the previous plan was unauthorized?" I smiled. "I'm telling you it's authorized now." The liaison from the audit board scribbled something in her notes. Another investor leaned forward, impressed. "This model's cleaner than the last version. Lower redundancy, higher yield. I'm glad you're leading this, Ms. Holt." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't look up again. By the time the call ended, the feedback summary was unanimous. Excellent clarity, impressive risk control, leadership confidence. Words they'd never used about me before. Richard closed his laptop and managed a strained smile. "Well done, Caroline. That went remarkably smoothly." "Of course it did," I said, gathering my notes. "It was designed to." As I left the room, I could feel Ethan's stare burning through the glass. Anger, disbelief, maybe even shame. But none of that mattered anymore. You can't fight gravity when the floor finally remembers who it's built for. Later that afternoon, I got a message from HR. Leadership title update approved. Effective immediately. Director of Strategic Infrastructure. A single line, no ceremony. Still, I read it 3 times before closing the email, letting the weight of those words sink in. That evening, I found Ethan sitting alone in the break room, sleeves rolled up, staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. The swagger was gone. No cologne, no audience, just silence. "You won," he said quietly, without looking up. I set my bag down. "No, Ethan, I didn't win. I just stopped losing." He let out a low laugh, bitter and broken. "You think this company cares who built what?" "They'll forget again. They always do." "Maybe," I said, "but they'll think twice before erasing the next woman who builds the foundation they stand on." He didn't answer. I picked up my bag and left him there, surrounded by the ghosts of his borrowed brilliance. Outside, the sun was setting, casting the city in a wash of amber and steel. I walked past the glass facade of Martech Dynamics, my reflection merging with the skyline. For the first time, it didn't look like a cage. It looked like a vantage point. When I reached the corner, my phone buzzed. An email from Richard. "Board recommends you for VP of Systems Strategy next quarter. Let's discuss Monday." I smiled to myself, slipped the phone into my pocket, and kept walking. The folder labeled lunch notes was still in my bag. I wasn't sure I'd ever throw it away. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a reminder of silence turned into leverage, of erasure turned into authorship. Some people burn bridges. I prefer to file them, by clause, by timestamp, by name. And as I disappeared into the evening crowd, I knew one thing for certain. In an office full of echoes, the quietest voice had finally become the one they all had to hear.